Good morning. It's Dr. Rutledge from San Diego, and I'm excited to be invited to speak at the Congress of the Endoscopic and Laparoscopic Surgeons in Malaysia. And I'll be talking a little bit today about the mini gastric bypass. I'm asked to talk about the present, the future, and comparison with bariatric guidelines, and do it in under 10 to 15 minutes. So that's asking a lot. I'll do my best to get through it. I would alert you that the longer version, which includes over 100 slides and a longer discussion of the anatomy, as well as some of the other details comparing the MGB to the sleeve and the Roux-en-Y, are available online. My email address is drr@clos.net, and we'll see that a few more times in the presentation, and I'd be happy to forward you the link to watch the video, and in addition, send you the slides for the presentation. I'd like to humbly thank everyone for inviting me to this meeting today, and particularly to talk about my favorite subject, the mini gastric bypass. I would especially to thank all those surgeons who fought at my side during the past 25 years against the opinion that the MGB was not a good operation, and remind everyone that the first one was done in September 1997. So now we're over 25 years since the first operation. But we wouldn't be here today with worldwide recognition and adoption of the MGB without the strong support of other leaders from countries all around the world. So I give thanks that I have the opportunity to be here with you. But if you cannot see them, there are hundreds of dedicated, skilled, knowledgeable surgeons who have supported the MGB to improve their patient care over the past 25 years. So there's a famous quote, with great power comes great responsibility, and I think that's applicable to the MGB. The MGB can be tremendously powerful. It can also be very gentle, and is unique because it can be tailored. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's likely that you're going to harm the patient and develop complications and not have good outcomes. The MGB has great power, that's been shown, but it also brings with it responsibility. Done well, it's a simple operation that can take as little as 15 to 20 minutes in skilled hands, but surgeons need to understand the anatomy, physiology, the mechanism of action, and the technique, as well as post-operative management. I have a lot of things I could talk about, and a lot of things I'd be happy to answer questions on. The focus is going to be primarily on the paradox that I see in the literature and my experience in consulting with surgeons around the world between the good MGB and bad MGB. And I'll try to give you an explanation of this conundrum that I face. And as I say here, reminding us of the movie Terminator 2, come with me if you want to live. And I would say, come with me if you want to do a good MGB. And don't do an MGB if you can't do a good one. I would say, in talking to Roux-en-Y as sleeve surgeons, and I think Michel Gagné will be here to talk about the sleeve, and I would imagine we'd have a few things we disagree on, but almost everything you know about the MGB is wrong if you're a dedicated, knowledgeable, and well-trained sleeve or Roux-en-Y surgeon. So there are some changes and differences that I think it's worth spending some time on to learn to handle the MGB correctly and not to harm your patients. To do this in particular, a group of us surgeons have created the MGB Review Corporation. And basically it's an educational group, a collaborative group, where we try to say that there are 3 levels of knowledge to be skilled at the MGB. Number 1 is called the bronze certificate, and that's just understanding the knowledge. Number 2 is performance, and that's a silver certificate, and gold certificate is outcomes. And for more information on that, again, feel free to contact me. Okay, with understanding comes power and safety. And of course, here's my email address. So drr@clos.net, and feel free to email me anytime. I'd be happy to give you more detail on some of these topics. Now, here's a French series. And I'd just like to say, good MGB, bad MGB. 16% gastrojejunostomy, stricture. Okay, they had a stricture at more than 1 out of 10 patients. Now, is that the surgery or is that the surgeon? I'm going to argue that we see lots of published papers of surgeons doing bad surgery. And my opinion is, not to be critical of these French surgeons, although a lot of French surgeons have done a lot of bad MGBs, On the other hand, there are a lot of French surgeons of good MGBs, but the country of France is now the leading backwards country in the MGB race, having been eclipsed by the United States, now joining us in offering the MGB and its endorsement. But my bias is this is not the MGB problem, this is a surgeon problem. Here's another example of the opposite. This study was reported from India. It's several thousand patients in 2019, and they looked at weight regain, sleeve 1/3. 1 out of 3 sleeves regain their weight, and I think that's conservative. Roux-en-Y 15%, but MGB in India by skilled surgeons 3%. MGB better than sleeve and Roux-en-Y. Well, we see other reports, and my bias is good MGB, bad MGB. This is an example of good MGB. I created the MGB back in September of 1997, and it's nothing special. It's just good old Bill Roth 2 and a callus gastroplasty. And so I'm here today to talk a little bit about that confusion, misunderstanding, diet, health, and the MGB. It's not just the MGB. There's a lot more to learning about this. So why are you here? I hope my objectives will be to tell you something you don't know, tell you something new, maybe from the future, clear up something confusing, and maybe tell you some of the things you think are right are wrong and wrong are right. So the history of the MGB in summary is pretty short and simple. Basically, I was one of the first surgeons doing laparoscopic Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. And I was a trauma surgeon for over 20 years. In 1997, a drug dealer was shot 6 times in the belly, and I got him up to the operating room with multiple injuries, and I did a distal gastrectomy, distal pancreatectomy, splenectomy. And following that, I had to reconstruct the gut and the stomach, and I did a standard Bill Roth 2 gastrojejunostomy. And that reminded me the next morning I had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass scheduled, and can't imagine what we used to do for Roux-en-Y and what surgeons used to tell me it was supposed to be done for a Roux-en-Y, including take out the gallbladder, do a retrocolic, retrogastric Roux-en-Y. It's just, I mean, it's ridiculous to remember it, except to learn from our mistakes. And so what we did is essentially did a callus gastroplasty and a gastrojejunostomy, and the results are now 20-some years later. Finally, the ASMBS has endorsed the MGB only 25 years later. And so you might say, well, your work is done. Well, not quite. The problem is this issue that I bring up, which is the MGB paradox. Some surgeons report excellent results, like my series and others, and some series report bad results, like the Y Omega trial, terrible results. And to just say it's not just in the past, because in 2021 in January, a group of Australian surgeons reported a variety of things about their so-called single anastomosis gastric bypass, and 10% required reoperation early for reflux. Well, we don't see that in the surgeons that I've worked with and I've trained. So again, why is this paradox of good MGB, bad MGB? And my bias is that the issue is the performance of the operation and the postoperative management. So to summarize again, excellent results with MGB using the original technique, myself and others, but occasional worldwide reports of very poor weight loss, excessive weight loss, bile reflux, leaks, and even death. That's the paradox. On the other hand, here's some examples of some really excellent results. This is Dr. Lee in Taiwan. Weight loss is much better with the MGB versus the Roux-en-Y. On the other hand, here you see reports of bile reflux from 0.3% to 35%. Highly variable. Y Omega trial, this is just a terrible trial. They say, oh, it's great because it's a controlled prospective randomized trial, led to this complete destruction of MGB in this country of France. And they said 20% of their patients who had MGB had diarrhea and steatorrhea. Well, I don't know who these guys are, but they're not very good surgeons if that's their MGB. That's what I would say. Not to be critical, but we don't see those results. And so maybe because they were in a randomized trial, they did a really bad MGB, but their MGBs are very different than what we see around the rest of the entire Earth. Here's another example. The rate of stenosis at 17% in this series, also from France. And they had, again, bad outcomes. So what are the possible explanations? Well, maybe the surgical procedure is really bad. And I would say, if you think any of these things are right, please don't do MGB. You know, you're just going to harm patients and make more complications. My hypothesis is the surgical technique and postoperative management can affect the results, and that should be obvious. Just as an example, here's what I call a twisted pouch. You can see, because the staple gun commonly comes in from below, the friction causes a twisting of the pouch. And then oftentimes surgeons tell me, oh, it's really good to do an anterior gastrojejunectomy. Well, that's wrong. This causes a partial outlet obstruction, ischemic ulcer, excessive weight loss, and other complications. This is an error according to my technique, the MGB original technique. And I think sometimes this, and here's a more extreme example. These are all available on the internet. These are surgeons reporting. Here's their results. And not surprisingly, the results here are bad. Well, this is a bad MGB. It's not the MGB is bad. It's a bad performance of the MGB. Okay, is the MGB a good, safe, effective operation? The IFSO says the MGB is no longer investigational. And following just a few MGB studies from the 2018 alone, and now the ASMBS has endorsed it as well. My hypothesis to you is the MGB is a good, safe, effective operation with numerous advantages. It's easily revised and reversed. It's easily managed and in well-trained hands, like any form of surgery. On the other hand, done badly, it can lead to complications. But MGB can be tailored, and that's unique amongst the operations. Usual bariatric patient is good for an MGB. Super obese, we can tailor a longer bypass. It can be handled in a difficult or borderline patient because it's easily reversed. And in the future, we believe it's going to be more useful for non-obese patients as well, particularly diabetes and other metabolic disease. So just as a reminder, wide pouch, moderate BP limb, wide gastrojejunectomy. And remember the keys to the general surgery of the MGB: long gastric pouch, wide gastric pouch, not obstructive, no dissection of the EG junction, moderate BP limb, not a short Roux-en-Y, and not a long SATI or BPD. A wide open, non-twisted gastrojejunectomy, that's just basic general surgery. Okay, let's do the operation here. So here we dissect the lesser curvature, first staple line perpendicular to the lesser curvature and down into the left lower quadrant, creating the pouch, leaving a wide base and staying lateral to the EG junction. Anterior gastrotomy, anerotomy, staple gastrojejunectomy, and suture closure. So the MGB is simple, elegant, effective, durable for over 25 years now, powerful, can be tailored to the patient. And very importantly, I think it's reversible and revisable within 15-20 minutes because of the technique. Now, because of the widespread misunderstanding, mismanagement, and reports of complications with the MGB, we recommend that the surgeon should undergo training to improve their outcomes. This is 25 years of misunderstanding with reports of death and complications from the non-expert Y omega and other MGB type surgeons. So we recommend training, and we do offer that if there's anyone interested. What we say is certification with several thousand other followers who are interested. There's a 2-day bronze, silver, and gold certificate course. And what we recommend that there is knowledge, bronze certificate, technical skill, cervical silver certificate, outcomes, gold certificate, and to become a teacher, then we offer a platinum certificate. I'd like to thank everyone for the invitation and say that we have a full video and slide presentation that's much more extensive, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And so I thank you all for being here and look forward to your questions.